inspired, fired up and on the move. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the places and all the races, arm in arm now, upon our feet. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the schools and all the homes, it's time to take it. It's time to take it to the street.
Gonna get militant up in here. Good evening, friends, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's edition of The Call. And boy, if there ever was a time when we needed people to educate others about the truth and also encourage people to take action, if there ever was a time to do that, now is the time with all this going on in this country and around the world. We really need for you, and yes, you too, to take a stand. And so today, our guest is someone who has taken many stands and continues to do so, and that is Charles Wells. Charles Wells is the president of Democracy 365, and he's also a consultant with Southern Echo, an organization we've been working with for decades that does amazing work. And he does all of that from Jackson, Mississippi. So joining us today is none other than Charles Wells from Jackson, Mississippi. Great to have you on, Charles.
Sir, it's a pleasure to be with you. And hopefully during this hour, we'll be able to share some information that the listeners can enjoy and also be a part of. And hopefully when it's all done, we'll have a clear vision on what we are dealing with every day.
Great, great. So a little bit before we jump into, what I teased you about before we got started, your favorite subject, because you and I have never had a conversation without you bringing up economics and what that means on the community level, particularly for people of African descent. And so why don't you tell folks, how you came to do the work that you do and a little bit about the work that you're doing right now.
Okay. My background is in finance. I've practiced as a CPA for many, many years. I'm a firm believer that since we live in a monetary society, every law that's passed at the local, federal, and state level determines how and who participates in the allocation of wealth. So when we come to the social justice arena, we look at different policies and see how those policies affect the communities that we live in. It affects them financially, and in the long term or short term. And I found that to be intriguing and trying to share this information with organizations and groups that we need to look at, that if we look at the complete picture, that it helps us to understand how we can more effectively change this society that we live in. So Reverend Woodbury, that's how I got here. As far as my background, have undergraduate and graduate degrees in accounting and business administration. I was a comptroller at Jackson State University for 8 years, the budget director at Jackson State University for 3 years. I also taught accounting at Jackson State. Been running my own business now and in consulting since 1993. So I try to bring all of this to the table in discussions that I participate in. And again, I thank you for having me on with you this morning. And again, I'm sure we're going to have a great time this morning, sir. And we might even talk a little bit about how to catch a big brim.
He always talks about brim too, because both of us love the fish. And so we always says he has his fishing stories that he tells, and then he wants to hear my fishing stories. If I ever caught a fish that big, it would be amazing. But we also always talk about economics because New Alphabet Community Development Corporation, when people ask us what we do, we say we work in the areas of environmental justice, climate justice, and community economic development. You know, to make all of that very short, we say we operate in the area of environomics, where the environment and where economics meet. And so, really interested. And you know, you are not the only African American finance person that I met who says, if we really knew how the game was played, we would live our lives and do things differently, and we would have more assets and more wealth in our families and in our community. So you talked about there being an entire system in place. So let's start off by talking about what we as individuals, what we as a community, what we even as organizations do with the assets that we have. What do we do with the money that we have? You know, and I'll start off. I'll just say this before you can let go. You know, I love to listen to Clyde Anderson, and he always talks about the fact that in the Black community, we spend 97% of our money outside of our community. And I always think to myself that if we took 97% of our money, what we make on our jobs and our businesses, if we gave 97% of that away, of course we'd be struggling to pay our bills in our house. So let's start off talking about what we do with our money, how we handle our money, how we do or do not invest our money.
Okay. On the point you mentioned about the 97%, and I was reading an article a while back, and it spoke about the rate that we turn over money in the communities where we live. It broke it down into three different. I'm gonna use the term race, but you know, race initially was used to identify where a person was born, not how we use it right now. It's used to identify superiority or inferiority, and it's used as a divisive term. But going back again, three categories this article spoke about. It spoke about Asians, Caucasians, and Blacks. Asians in their community, they would turn over money in their community 27 days before it left outside of that community going someplace else. Caucasians, the time period was between 23 to 25 days. The money would turn over in their communities prior to it going out of the community where they live. In the case of Blacks, it stayed in their community 6 hours. So, but then if we can peel that, take an onion and peel it back some to try to see why that's the case. Like let me give you an example, like in Jackson, Mississippi, that's where I am right now. The city of Jackson does not have a movie theater. And Jackson is the largest city in the entire state of Mississippi. It does not have a movie theater in the city limits. If you live in Jackson, you want to go to a movie, you must go to a city that's that's outside of Jackson, but right on the outskirts of Jackson, but outside of Jackson. So there's a couple of things taking place there. Over time, and I guess we'll talk about critical race theories maybe a little bit later on, but over time, businesses have been encouraged to move out of Black areas. We have been taught throughout history also especially not to support businesses in our communities, especially people of color. You know, a Caucasian business can do something wrong to us in finance, like getting a mortgage. One mortgage company may not treat us right, so we have to go to another mortgage company that's owned by a Caucasian. We don't mind doing that in the same day. We go to one mortgage company or one business owned by Caucasians in the morning, and they don't do us right. We go to another one that afternoon, a Caucasian business, and we don't think about that. But if a minority does something to you, we'll remember that for the rest of our entire life. We would not go to a minority business. In this country, minority businesses, we have roughly 124,000 minority businesses in this country out of 30.2 million businesses, which means we got roughly 45% of the businesses, minority businesses, the percentage is 45%. Now we only frequent minority business, roughly about 5% our sales. So we have a situation where we have money, but the big figure, let me back a little bit. We also have a lot of people living from paycheck to paycheck, and they're barely making it. In Mississippi, we do food distributions with Southern Echo, and there are many people that they're struggling with having food from one day to the next. We did a water drive this weekend. People's coming through, and when you look at them, you can tell that they are struggling. So these people, they have money, but the question is that of the amount of money that they get, how much of it is it that allows them to say it is discretionary money, as opposed to money that's required for them to buy food, utilities, rent or house payment, clothing for the children, for those necessities that one has. Once they take care of the necessities, how much is left? And Reverend Woodbury, that's what I be thinking about, that when we take those numbers that minorities have, and we look at what's discretionary after the necessities have been taken care of. What would that percentage be then? And I do not know the answer to that question. I think that's something that maybe is good for maybe a discussion about it, and try to peel that onion back to see what that number is made of, that 97%. What percentage of that is vital for survival compared to, say, discretionary money that one can make a decision with. But in addition to that, as you mentioned earlier, people need to be educated on what monetary systems are, what financial systems are, and how things that they need to do that will allow them to increase their family's wealth. Because I think in this country right now, Caucasians' net worth I think it's like 10 times that of minorities. I think one number I heard that if you take minorities, I think this was exclusive of their home, the net worth of minorities was like 17,000, and then of Caucasians was like 170,000. Right. So there's a lot built into that.
And let me jump in a minute, because you said two things that we need a little clarification for our audience. And then I want to ask you something else. So in other words, you said Jackson, Mississippi is the largest city in the state.
Yes, sir.
But it doesn't even have a movie theater. Its water system is in horrible shape. The stormwater, wastewater systems, all of those in horrible shape. Usually the largest city is the most prosperous city. What is the percentage? What percentage of the population in Jackson, Mississippi is Black?
Reverend Woodbury, if I had to guess, and I wish I knew that right offhand for you. I really do not know. I know that we are in the majority, that I do know. Our school systems we struggle with finance with our schools, because schools values are tied to property values. I'm going to back up. You mentioned about the water system in Jackson. I'm going to share this point with you. I won't call the mayor's name, but we had two mayors, and they were both minority mayors. And one of the mayors, the city of Jackson had a $1.2 billion grant to the Department of Transportation for water, sewer, and street repair. The last mayor let that grant lapse. It was a 3-year grant. Those dollars could have been used to help with the water system, as you mentioned a few minutes ago. Street repair that could have taken place, but that did not take place. And me, I go back, how could something like that happen, and what's the overall purpose of that? Earlier we talked about critical race theory. You know, the city of Jackson budget right now is like $264 million. So the question would be, how could a mayor forget that there was a $1.2 billion grant on his books to help the city? Now, personally, I think that was done to reduce the quality of life in Jackson. And not only at the short term, but on the long term, because as you mentioned, right now, we just had a water crisis maybe 4 months ago.
Yeah.
We had a water crisis, and our streets are in there. We need repair on our streets. Now, current mayor, I think he's trying to do a good job of that. He's having to deal with the hand that's dealt him. But I think that the economics of the city, we have developers, and I'm not seeing a Black developer yet, at least in Mississippi, that has influence that I've been able to see. For me, it's an economic game, and really, and if you want to if you want to go see a movie in Jackson, if you live in Jackson, you have to go to maybe about 3 cities right outside of Jackson to go to see a movie. Even we have one bowling alley, I think one.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wish to bowl, you have to go outside of Jackson, pretty much.
But I'm sure you have a lot of, and I had some people become upset with me, and this was over 10 years ago. I did an article for the Community Times, our local Black newspaper, and I bet you have a lot of what I call slow growth, no growth businesses, which are not throwing any shade, but we have a lot of hair care businesses. We have a lot of barbershops and beauticians, and it's really hard for them to grow because the owner can only do so many heads a day, and they're running out chairs. And once you've rented out all the chairs, you pretty much have, capped off the amount of revenue you can create from that business. And that's why you see them selling clothes and DVDs and incense and that sort of stuff, searching for another way to continue to make money. But, you talked about the fact that money circulates in our community for only 6 hours, where for whites it's up to 25 hours.
25 days.
A day, yeah, a day. And so, and then we talked about the fact that you said, what is it that we spend 5% of our time in Black businesses, and then we have what I call an unofficial boycott of Black businesses. So while Blacks spend most of their money and most of their time in white-owned businesses, we other races spend very little time in Black businesses. Rarely do you walk into a Black business and see a lot of whites, a lot of Asians in our businesses, and Indians, Pakistanis, etc. And I call it an unofficial boycott of Black businesses. And something has to be behind this mentality of all the different races involved in the unofficial boycott, and Blacks which do not spend time or money with their own businesses. And that leads to what you've mentioned a couple of times already, what some people call institutional racism or critical race theory. So why don't you share with our viewers and listeners, because I'll share this with our viewers. Now the call is not only available to you on the internet, but also on a Florence radio station. And so for our viewers and our listeners, why don't you give us a definition of what you call critical race theory?
Okay, this I'm going to read something to you from this is from the American Bar Association. It says that it says principles of critical race theory. Recognition that race is not biologically real, but is socially constructed and socially significant. It recognizes that science, as demonstrated in the Human Genome Project, refutes the idea that there are biological racial differences, which says that, you know, this thing about if you have a certain color, you have your intellect or your IQ is higher because of your race. Science says that is not the case. That it says that, and this theory also says that social constructs relates to laws and our legal systems, that they're there to perpetuate the advantage of one race compared to another. Example, we spoke earlier about education, and Reverend Woodbury, I know you do quite a bit of work on that. You also, as I know, you also do work in with environmental issues. I'm going to deal with it with an actual case of environmental issues. As a matter of fact, since we work with dogwood. We had a representative of dogwood down here this week, and we were down in Gloucester, Mississippi, where there's a wood pellet plant. It's a Drax wood pellet plant. But guess where it is located? It's located right on the outskirts of Gloucester, which is a town that is predominantly Black. There are many people there experiencing health issues with allergies. Some dealing with a high rate of cancer. But again, this plant is right there. I'm right in the city. Question would be, why is it there? Of all the places where it could be, it's right there in the town. And if we peel that onion back, the impact of low quality air, or if there are some carcinogens in the air, what's the impact? The quality of life goes down health-wise. People that citizens there that can't afford to move, they will move. So therefore, and those that can move, they're probably some of your higher income earners compared to the population there. So then you have wealth flight taking place. So we have health issues that are causing the quality of life to be lower. We have the economic system getting weaker. So the overall quality of life in this community gets worse. But then the state allows these plants to operate there. So then the question becomes, how do you address something? How do you address a situation like this, where using a statement that President Obama said, he said the ship has left the dock. The best that I can do is maybe to nudge it a little, nudge the direction that the boat is traveling some. So in a case like in Gloucester, and get to the economic development issue, Reverend Woodbury, how do we deal with a situation like that where the plant is there? It's an integral part of the economics of the community, because there's no other business, large business. There's the small businesses like you were speaking about, barbershops and things. So what economic engine do they have there other than that plant? So how do we find a balance so that there's economic vitality there in the community, and there's a high quality of life? How do we do that? And I won't propose to have all the answers, but I do say that that's the answer that we need to come forth with to solve these issues, because the community cannot afford for the plant to leave, but also the community can't afford to die. The people. So how do we do that? So what we're looking at down there, Reverend Woodbury, is to find small businesses and to perpetuate the growth of small businesses by identifying areas where there is a demand, and providing technical support as relates to marketing and their financial records and planning to allow them to be able to hire people in that community. And so that this business will grow, will continue to grow year after year after year. One thing that we are doing there, we're looking at having a tire plant there, not a tire plant, but selling tires there, 18-wheeler tires, things, because in that area, there's quite a bit of 18-wheeler log trucks hauling logs and 18-wheelers, transportation issues. So that's something that we're looking at, that we are exploring there. And it's off the ground. So that's just one avenue. And I think that's what we have to do in all communities, try to find the uniquenesses that they have there and find a way to build upon it and have people that live there to operate these businesses, but also provide the backroom support that they need. Because like an example, a person can be a heck of an auto mechanic, but that doesn't mean that they know how to operate an auto repair shop. So we have to find a way to assist in that and bringing those two skills together. But it's challenging because a lot of times people that start businesses, as you know, they have to be independent thinkers. They have to be strong. They have to be strong-willed because there are a lot of things they have to deal with trying to get working capital from banks, which can be very difficult. So then you have to find a way to get them to listen to you and also get them to trust you. So because they don't, so they don't think they're trying to take their livelihood from them. So it's a process that will take some time. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, and we've had this discussion before, how do we encourage business development in our communities? How do we get the support from the community for that business to be sustainable? But also the businesses, one thing I would say that business need to do, and we should demand this from all businesses in the communities where we are, that they give back and that they be respectful to the people that support them. And so then it takes us back to education. How do we educate the communities, the people in the communities? How do we educate them on how systems are structured, what they are entitled to, how they should be respected, and how they should be respected, and how they should respect others, so that we have everybody's pulling in the same direction to help the quality of life in those communities get better and better.
And you mentioned systems. I'm still was, and I thought I had an idea about what percentage of the population in Jackson is Black. And so one of my colleagues pulled it because I continue to be just astounded that there's so much poverty and so little development and wealth in the largest city in any state. And so the percentage of Blacks in Jackson, Mississippi, the largest city in Mississippi that doesn't even have a movie theater, is 97% Black. And so when we look at critical race theory and institutionalized racism, systemic racism, like you said, it's a false premise. There's nothing biological that says that one race is superior or inferior to another. And, I say to people sometimes, I don't say in a way where Black people get angry with me, but we haven't really had a Black president yet, unless we're going to use the standard that the Southern slave owners used, where they said 1 drop of Black blood makes you Black. But now, when we can actually analyze each other's DNA, we don't know if President Obama's DNA says that he has more European genes than African American. But I just want to point that out, that we all operate under this false concept of race. But going back to institutional or systemic systemic institutionalized racism. A lot of it is, you brought up some of the, the things around the water system. And one of the things we're looking at in Florence and some other cities it is around zoning. And so what we're finding, looking, and we're still continuing to look in predominantly African American communities, is that there is a very, very small percentage of land that is zoned for businesses, for commercial use. And so, you talked about how, well, it's hard for me to trust a Black accountant, a Black insurance company, if I don't see them in my community. If the ones that I see are predominantly white owned, and the reason why I'm not seeing them is because zoning limits it limits the possibilities of even having Black owned businesses in our communities. And so that's an example of structural racism, that when it comes to laws, zoning, planning meetings, 10-year comprehensive plans, state plans around energy and health and those sort of things, that if we're not at the table and we are not positioned legally, in terms of city ordinances and zoning, and if those structures are biased against us, then of course we're going to have fewer businesses, which means that we're not only choosing to spend our money outside of our communities, we're forced to spend our money outside of our community.
You are. You are forced. And you mentioned about the zoning. When we've heard the terms when it comes to banking and things, the mortgage companies, the term redlining. That goes back to the 30s, and the federal government did. They were ones that put that system in place, and that those lines that are still used to a great extent today determines, when it comes down to getting mortgage, if a bank will, the amount of money that you will be able to get for a mortgage. So this thing goes way back to even to this. When the Constitution was done. You mentioned about the 1/3 and all of those kinds of things. This goes back to the founding of the Constitution, that there were things embedded in our law that was with the intent of making sure that certain people were treated more or less favorable upon the law. And since you mentioned, I'm going to throw one other thing in there, Reverend Woodbury. The thing about democracy, people say we live in a democracy. I'm going to make a crazy statement. If you look at the structure of how we vote and how that's all structured, the question is that have we ever had a democracy? And was the intent of the Constitution for us to have a democracy? Look at some of the Hamilton papers. It says that the parts of this says that a democracy cannot be that if democracy operated the way that it should, the masses would take away the wealth of the affluent. And it said, the next statement said that this cannot be allowed. It also says that speaks about how the logic, the common sense, or the rationale of the public, that the public cannot be relied upon to use rational thought. And I'm gonna make a crazy statement. I have to make crazy statements. When I look at how the election came out, the last election, the number of people that voted for different ideologies that I think are not sustainable in this country, it makes you wonder about the logical thought process of many people in this country. However, in conjunction with that, as part of the agreement to end the Civil War, the South agreed not to teach critical thinking in their schools. And when you just look at that on the surface, it doesn't sound like, not very much, but if you get to a point where people are not able to critically think about an issue, the result is that you have a population of followers. So if I want to lead people that don't critically think about a whole bunch of things, if I can find some words that sound good to them, since they don't understand the implications, since the full impact of cause and effect may not be clear to them as of that time, we end up voting against our own interests and be happy about it.
Yeah, that's and two good examples that show that from the very beginning of this country and when they were constructing what is supposed to be the pillars of democracy, we see, as you said, it's been an ongoing battle. And it's two things. The first is the census that, at the founding of this country, they realized that if they allowed the South, because, for people who may not know, and I know most of our audience knows this, every state gets 2 senators, but the House of Representatives is based on your population. And so because they knew the South was already the richest region out of the 13 colonies, with South Carolina being the richest of the 13 colonies of all of the colonies. And if they would have allowed the slaves to be counted along with the whites, then you would have had complete and total dominance of the United States by the South. And so that's why they came up with counting Blacks as only 3/5 of a person. And since the founding of this country to last year, we always have a struggle with counting how many Black people are in this country, and devices have been put in place. So where ethnicity and nationality are often placed on the application as if they're race. So, if you're Latino, Latina, Latinx, whichever term you prefer, you have Blacks who look just as Black as us. You have people who look white with blue eyes and blonde hair, because that's not actually a race. It's people who come from countries that speak Latin-based languages, which should include people from Portugal and Spain and Germany, which are all Latin-based languages. So that's a false construct. And then we have Hispanics, which are people who come from countries that were colonized by Spain. And that's I believe it's to dilute the number of people of African descent when it comes to counting. So, and the other thing is voting. So, there was a big debate at the founding of this country, whether or not people of African descent should vote. And we've had to go over that again and again. So after the Civil War, we had the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments that helped to give us the right to vote. We lost it with the emergence of Jim Crow, and then we had to go back again in 1964 and 65 and ensure that we had the right to vote. And now as we speak, we have House Resolution number 1, the John Lewis bill, once again trying to fight back suppression and ensure we have the right to vote. So there's some fundamental, there's some systemic, there's some institutional things in this country that have purposely been put in place to make sure that Blacks cannot compete equally, and to ensure that our status is repressed, is suppressed, and that we are actually providing wealth for people, whether we're working in the fields picking cotton and tobacco, or we're trying to set up our own businesses to make sure that we have less wealth and that we're actually providing and producing so that others can have wealth. Yeah. That's what you were saying, is that it's a continuing battle, and we're not going to solve it by getting out demonstrating. We're only going to solve it if we can change the systems that are in place in this country.
That's true. And I would like to respond to two things that two things that you had mentioned. We were talking about democracy, and you mentioned the 2 senators per state. And when you look at, if we live in a democracy, I think New Hampshire may have less than 1 million people. They get 2 senators.
mhm,
The state of California has 39 million people. They get 2 senators.
mhm,
And the rules of the Senate right now, 1 senator can basically almost stop anything. So the question is, whether one agree or disagree, but the question is, should a senator from New Hampshire be able to, should have the same amount of power as a senator from California? I won't try to answer that question, but I'm just throwing that out. You also brought up the census. The one thing the census, as you know, it used to draw lines, district lines, and it determines how many congressmen and you have from each state. But the other thing that it does, it also determines the amount of money that each state gets through federal dollars. Now Mississippi gets, I think if it's not the highest percentage of federal dollars in their budget, it will be next. We have one of the highest percentages of federal dollars in our state budget of any state in the country. We also are near the bottom as relates to capital, the amount of earnings. But now, let me share this point with you. The state of Mississippi last year, and looked at their financial statement. The budget, our normal budget is roughly about $6 billion thereabouts, but we spend about 21 billion. So that means that the difference is coming through other federal programs to the state. And that's because of the census count. But the thing, and I'm gonna throw this out, Reverend Woodbury, that I experienced firsthand. Members from the Census Bureau, I posed this question to them. Since the training that was given by the Census Bureau says that when you go to the communities and trying to encourage them to register, to do the census, to participate in the census, let them know that money will come to your community because money follows the person. But when I posed the question to the census people, also some senators of the state of Mississippi, and also a young man that used to be the state treasurer of the state of Mississippi, I said, who in the state that you know of that makes sure that when dollars come from the federal government, that make sure that those dollars go to the communities where the people were counted by the census? And guess what the answer was? I don't know who does that. Again, this was that the census people did not know. Elected officials at the state level did not know, and at the city level. So, and as a test of that, of what I perceive to be happening is that no one, that isn't true, that monies don't follow the person. I've looked at the city of Jackson. City of Jackson has roughly 160, according to what data you look at. Let's round it to $170,000. I'm not talking 170,000 people. For the last year, the state of Mississippi got roughly $5,000 per person, based upon the census count. In Mississippi, roughly 2.9 million people, about $5,000. If you multiply that 170,000 times 5, you get roughly $830-some million. And over 10 years, and the census count is good for 10 years. That's about $8 billion that the city of Jackson should get, just based upon numbers and the census count. But the city of Jackson budget is less than $300 million a year. So where's the other $5 million, difference between 200 and 800, $500 million? Where are those dollars going? They're not coming to Jackson, but the state of Mississippi gets it. So the state of Mississippi is able to allocate those dollars to, based upon program criteria that's been set up by the legislature and different agencies. They are able to steer where the money goes. So that's something on the sense we talk about the census. I hope people would also, in addition to looking at the inaccurate counts when it comes to minorities, but also look at how when the money does come to the state, what criteria or what policies or what regulation that the state has set up that determines where those dollars will go. Because the city of Jackson's missing roughly $500 million a year.
Mhm. Yeah, and see, that's the thing too, that we look at the end, we don't look at the beginning. processes. When I say that, I mean Black. And a good example of that is we make every state that has a state lottery literally has made billions of dollars. And but when we look at our schools are they're in horrible shape. You know, they need new buses. The buses need to be replaced or repaired. You know, we have schools that have such a lack of supplies that, you know, I'm sure in Jackson, like here in South Carolina, parents are asked to uh, buy paper and pencils and other supplies that the school should have on hand and have their children bring that to school so they have supplies. So what happens? Oh, everybody got excited about the lottery. In most states, they had a voter referendum and people came out and voted for the lottery. But and they're all educational lotteries. So why are our schools doing so poorly? Because once they set up the lottery system and we took our eyes off the ball, the state legislators were able to set up a budget where they said this much lottery money will go for construction of new schools. This much lottery money will go for repairs. This much lottery dollars will go towards transportation. This much will go for raises for teachers. And the rest goes in the general treasury for us to spend as we see fit. And I have not run into a state where all of the money from the educational lottery goes towards education. So, you know, that process that you talked about, that money's come in from the federal level, money comes in from taxes, from educational lotteries, etc. But how that money is allocated and where it's allocated is something that community members, we don't keep our eye on the ball. And unfortunately, we often don't get adequately informed by the state house and state senate representatives that we put in office. So allocation of resources, but I want to talk a little more about what we can do rather than the obstacles. Like, you know, one thing that we're going to be advocating for here is having more of the district, more zoning for business, for commercial in predominantly African American communities. So if someone wants to start a business and they get to the stage where they have so many customers, they don't want them coming to their home anymore. And during the pandemic, you can't meet them in McDonald's or Starbucks, that you have an opportunity to have a business center or a business office complex in our community. Talking about things like that, the fact that so much of business is now e-commerce, so much is online, where if you build a large enough customer base, no one knows what race you are. And if you're providing quality products and services, they probably will not care. So let's talk about some of the solutions. You also mentioned too about record keeping, and I know that's a huge obstacle. Only 2% of Black businesses got PPP money for their businesses, and in a lot of cases, it's because their books weren't kept up. So maybe you can talk about too record keeping, which is very important if you want to get money for your business.
Yeah. The thing about the PPP, when we look at, I'm going to regress a little bit. We spoke earlier, when it boils down to when you're trying to get dollars from banks or get mortgages, you know, there's a certain procedure that's put in place and certain documents that are required. And the PPP did the same thing. It fell in line with that, like requiring certain documents. If you have a business and you living, you're barely making it. The question is, can you afford, since you may not have the skill set to keep your records properly? Then the question is, then can you afford to have, or do you see the importance of someone to keep those records for you? And I would say that in a lot of cases, a lot of business owners may not appreciate the importance of that. How do we get them to recognize them, how important that is? Goes back to earlier, some things you mentioned earlier about training. We need to educate people about how do we do that. You know, the SBA, of all the years that I've worked with providing financial services to clients. Very few of the clients that I work with were able to get SBA loans. But Caucasian females can get them, because Ronald Reagan made Caucasian females a minority. So they were able to get, again, talking about institutional racism. Caucasian females were able to get loans that really was loans for their husbands. But we all know that. Reverend, there's so much that we're talking about here. Just it's mind-boggling when I think about it. But I think repeat your question, because I kind of got to get off track with so much about the mind here.
What can we do to change this? I talk about online businesses where you're not limited to the community. What are some of the things that we can do? I guess let me put it this way. How can we create our own systems? How can we create our own institutions where we can bypass the current ones that are both unjust and lack any degree of equity?
First of all, you mentioned earlier about minorities. We need to, first of all, understand the importance of working with each other. We need to be able to form groups where we are willing to put our resources together and form a larger umbrella of businesses, like down, and I was sharing with you about Gloucester. Working with them right now, they have many independent truckers there. But for them to be able to and respond to requests for services for a corporate and a corporate level, they could do it if they have a one umbrella that they all work up under. Then they can show capacity. But one of them by themselves would not be able to do that. There are some advantages, some things available now through up under the monies that's coming because of COVID. However, individuals with small businesses, they need to consult with individuals that can help them maneuver through the requirements there. So I would say working together more, educating, but us providing more educational services, and when we do that now, we provide training for business owners and helping them to understand how things work, but also providing hands-on services, hands-on assistance to them. We need to identify the things in a community that community can that's a part of the community where they are. Like in the Delta, in some places we have food deserts. What is that we can do there for there to be a sustainable operation that can provide fresh vegetables to communities there? How do we do that? And that's in process right now down in Macomb. We work for that to take place there. We've also created a working relationship with a financial institution, with a credit union, whereas they are and provided capital to them, so they're able to provide financial access for small businesses. Other thing that this has allowed to do is allowing to help with getting rid of the payday loans. While we have individuals having to deal with payday lending because of that credit scoring and things. So having that type of relationship is allowing a dent to be made in reducing the number of people that have to go to payday lending. So, and also providing dollars that can help with with some small business things right now, because for some people, $1,000 may not mean a lot, but for some people, it means a heck of a lot. I'll give you an example. I was up in the Delta one day. This was last year. There's a young lady up there that does food. She has a food distribution center, and we have a plan that we can share that about how communities can accumulate money to help do things. And I posed to her, I said, what dollar amount per month do you think that could impact the quality of life for a family here in the Delta? And this was in Drew, Mississippi. Guess what the answer was, Reverend Woodbury?
Okay.
She said $50.
Mm.
Can you imagine? That means that there's some things there that there's some people really having to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're having to do without. So small programs, and we have a couple of those that allows people to pool resources to support some things for a common interest that can benefit everyone that does participate. Again, but we can create small organizations in our communities where money can accumulate and it can be used to do various things. It doesn't have to be through a bank, but we need to know how to do that and be trusting enough to allow these things to work. We have to think outside the box that we have been told that exists. And we have to do things for ourselves. We have the ability to do some things for ourselves. You did mention about how money, 97% of the money how much money we spend. We need to find ways so people are willing to put a few dollars into a pot so that pot can be used to fund business ventures within our community. That's in a summary form, but that's what we got to do, because the powers that be, the structures that exist, Reverend Woodbury, as you know, they're not there for us.
No. And you know, I wanted to hit on, you know, because we're coming to the close now, but I'm glad you really hit on what I have seen is a major problem in our community is a lack of trust, where we don't invest in business ventures with each other. We don't partner with each other. You know, we could be almost broke, but we're going to Walmart, and Walmart is where it is because of the number of companies that they partner with.
Yes.
They work with, you know. And so until we get to that point where we're willing to say someone wants to build a house and you get 10 people who put in their money together, and you make a little money back off of it after you sell the house, but it's more than what you had. But until we begin to invest with businesses, whether we're doing it as shoppers, whether we're doing it as investors, or whether we're doing it partnering with each other so that we increase each other's capacity, we're going to remain in the hole that we're in, even though we know that race is a false narrative, even though we know that there are structures and systems in place that are not in place to help us, but to limit and to harm us. So coming to the close, why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you? You know, maybe they want to use your training, your consulting services, or partner with Democracy 365.
I can be reached at 601-720-3417, and you can email me at Wells_Charles, WELLS _Charles, CHARLES 3030 @ or associateswells@comcast.net.
Okay.
And Reverend Woodbury, it's been a pleasure being on with you this morning. And maybe one day we'll get out on the fishing bank together.
Oh yes. I want you to take me to that place where you caught those over 112-pound brim. Every one of them weighed 12 pounds or more. I have to find that fishing hole, right? We always
Yes, sir.
something like that.
Yes, sir.
But it's been great having you on, Charles Wells of Wells and Associates, and also the president of Democracy 365 in Jackson, Mississippi. And if you want to get in touch with us at the call or New Alpha Community Development Corporation, you can reach us by emailing us at newalphacdc@gmail.com or by going onto our website, newalphacdc.com. And so until next week, this time, let's remember the call, a call to action, the advocacy, the policy change, the education, or just helping one another. So take care, stay blessed, and remember, we need you to answer the call.
From all the places and all the races.